Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today I will be doing my predictions for this weekend's play-in tournament. There are going to be 6 matches, 2 in the Eastern region, 4 in the Western region. No pick'ems for this one on the Overwatch League website, so we're just looking at the Liquipedia bracket for this one. It's kind of the easiest way to look at it. So I'll throw it up so you can kind of see which teams we have playing in the Western region. First round will be the Paris Eternal and the Washington Justice facing off, with the Boston Uprising taking on the Toronto Defiant. And then the San Francisco Shock and Houston Outlaws await the results of those first 2 matches. And in the Eastern region, the Philadelphia Fusion will take on the Hangzhou Spark, with the winner going up against the Seoul Dynasty. 2 teams from the Western region will qualify, 1 team from the Eastern region will qualify. So let's jump in. Let's start with the easier of the 2 brackets. Let's start with the Eastern region. That round 1 match between the Philadelphia Fusion and the Hangzhou Spark is going to be one that I think will be pretty one-sided in favor of the Philadelphia Fusion. I think the Fusion just look better. I think they've been a better team so far this season. Yeah, they had some struggles at times, but the Hangzhou Spark were a team that had 4 wins in the June Joust and 3 wins the entire rest of the season. And I just do not have much confidence in them. Obviously, new flex support situation with this team, having to switch from MCD to now Coldest. And while Coldest is a player that I like, I don't know if I see them going for IDK Coldest or Mika Coldest, and if they do, then the synergy that's been built all season is now gone. It's a whole thing. It's a whole situation that I just don't really see favoring the Spark. I think the Fusion have looked better recently than the Spark have. I think that the Fusion are getting better now that their roster is mostly together. And so for me, this one I think is pretty easy in favor of the Hangzhou Spark. Where it gets interesting, in my opinion, is the Seoul Dynasty taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. Because these matches are happening on the same day, back-to-back. So the Seoul Dynasty will have had the opportunity to watch the previous match. And they'll have an idea of what happens. So before I get into talking about Philadelphia Fusion versus the Seoul Dynasty, here's what I do want to say. If in some situation the Hangzhou Spark do manage to beat the Philadelphia Fusion and make it into this match, I don't think it's a competition at all. I think Seoul Dynasty wins that one. In my opinion, for that to happen, the Philadelphia Fusion would have to have a major implosion of, never before seen a never before seen scale, which, guess what? It's the Philadelphia Fusion. If it's going to happen to any team, it's them or the Houston Outlaws. And so to me, the Seoul Dynasty are significantly stronger than the Hangzhou Spark. And if the Spark are able to beat the Fusion, it's because of a Fusion implosion, not because of a Spark looking better than expected, in my opinion. Obviously, it could be wrong, but in that scenario where that happens, that's what I think would happen. But if the Fusion look as good as I think they will, and they beat the Hangzhou Spark, and they go up against the Seoul Dynasty, I think it's an incredibly interesting matchup and a tough one to pick. Even still, I'm making this video right now, I don't feel confident in what's going to happen. We don't know what the meta is going to be yet. We can kind of assume it would be somewhat similar to what we saw in the Summer Showdown, though who knows, there's been hero changes since then, so it could have changed. But we saw a lot of Wrecking Ball run back then. In a Wrecking Ball meta, I actually really like Mono. I think Mono is a very good Wrecking Ball. I don't feel as good about Marvel or Gesture in a Wrecking Ball meta, but Seoul doesn't really play those games anyway. They kind of run what they want to run. They don't really run the Wrecking Ball as much as some other teams do. They like to run a lot of Ryan if they can, Orisa whenever they can, or Winston. They tend to avoid the Wrecking Ball as much as possible, so we'll see if that's what the meta is. Orisa seems to be pretty strong right now, is what a lot of the teams have been running. It's what the Gladiators ran a lot of in the Countdown Cup, so we'll see what the consensus is in terms of what people want to run. But I think with Lucio coming back into the meta, Rush becomes a little bit better. That favors the Philadelphia Fusion a little bit more, because I think that allows Funny Astro to be able to step up, be more comfortable in the hero he's really good at. When you have both EQO and Shockwave on this roster, you also have Echo returning. Both of those 2 players have looked great on the Echo so far in their careers. We haven't really seen Shockwave yet, so who knows if we'll see him or not. I hope we do, because I think Shockwave's very, very good. And I think that if they have the opportunity to play him, and play him on the Echo, I think they should, because that's one of the heroes he's looked very good on. I think that opens Carpe up to be a little bit better as well, perform at a higher level. Ash returns. I think that's another place where you could see both Shockwave and Carpe kind of take a step up and play some of their better heroes. So I think that the hero pool helps the Fusion more than it helps a lot of other teams. But obviously in that same situation, you have the Seoul Dynasty now who can play some of the heroes they're very good at. Now, if Orisa Sigma is the meta, don't be surprised if we see Gesture Marvel playing the Orisa Sigma, because that is something that the Seoul Dynasty love to play. And if they have the ability to play that, they will play that. I think, just because that's what their entire past has taught me. So I'll be interested to see what happens in this matchup. It's really tough to call. In one side of my brain is saying the Seoul Dynasty have been far more consistent this season, and I think they're the safer pick because they've been much better this season. They've looked a lot better. They've hit the higher peaks. They've made a tournament. The Philadelphia Fusion have not. The other side of me is saying the Philadelphia Fusion are getting everything together when they need to. It's the perfect timing. This is when they should be able to succeed. This is when things should be working. If there is a time for them to do anything, it's right now when the meta is in their favor. But if you watch my power ranking, I kind of spoiled who I think is going to move on in this one. I just have to go with the Seoul Dynasty. They beat the Fusion twice recently. The second time was a way more one-sided series in their favor. Yes, the heroes are coming back that I think will benefit the Fusion. I think this is a close series no matter what. But Seoul have just shown me more this season. I just feel better about them as a whole. And so I have to go with the Seoul Dynasty. I think they have just they just look better. And for me, that's really all it comes down to. They should be able to find a way to win and should be able to win because I think they've been better, they've been more consistent, and I just think Prophet and Fitz are such a strong duo that I don't really see a situation where Carpe EQO or Carpe Shockwave or Rascal, whatever combination they run, is able to best Prophet and Fitz. They're just too good, and I just think that this one's going to go the way of the Seoul Dynasty, though I think it'll be very close, no matter what. Moving on to the Western region. First game is the Paris Eternal taking on the Washington Justice. This game's happening tomorrow. This one's really tough to pick. The Justice are a team that are in a really weird place where they look good some weeks and they look like the worst team in the league other weeks. Sometimes it's a whole month where they look really good and a whole month where they look really bad. They have so much talent on this roster, but they just can never quite seem to get it together. But one thing I think is very interesting about this Justice team, and something that I've been keeping my eyes on as I have been kind of thinking over what I think is going to happen in these matches. So the Justice finished the season with a 9-7 record, which I would say all in all pretty disappointing when you look at this team. This is not a team that should be finishing 9-7 when they have this much talent on the roster, but they had a lot of weak, months and weak tournaments and stuff, but 9-7 is their final record of the season. And if you include results from their two tournament knockout match appearances, or the two tournaments they had knockout matches, which were the May Melee and the Summer Showdown, the Washington Justice, when there are no hero pools, are 8-3, 7-1 in the regular season, and then 1-2 in the knockout matches. And then when you look at their record outside of that, you look at their record in the metas where there were hero pools, so the June Joust, the Countdown Cup, they're 2-6. So the Washington Justice are a really, really good team when there's no hero pools. Now, when they get to the tournament matches, the elimination matches, and they play your better teams, they lost to the Florida Mayhem in the May Melee, they lost to the Dallas Fuel in the Summer Showdown, but they pushed the Dallas Fuel to their limits, and we saw them beat a Paris team back then that was looking to be pretty good. So the Washington Justice are in a very interesting position where when there's no hero pools, which there is not in playoffs, they look much better than they do when there are hero pools. And so I feel like you have to think the Justice are going to be in a better position. Now, they also have not looked great at the start of metas usually. Usually they kind of start turning it around towards the end. So you kind of look at where they are at the beginning of metas, and they don't really seem as strong. To me, this is a very tough series to pick, mainly because of how inconsistent the Justice are. This shouldn't be a close series, in my opinion. This should be a match that is easily winnable for the Washington Justice. And in my opinion, the Washington Justice should not have picked the Paris Eternal. I think the Boston Uprising are a better team than the Eternal. Wait, I'm mixing myself up. I think the Uprising are the worst team than the Eternal. I think the Uprising are not playing well right now. They had a terrible, terrible Countdown Cup, and I think that they are not going to look very good in this meta. The Eternal, yeah, sure, they have had their ups and downs. They weren't incredible this past tournament, but they were better than the Uprising were. But the Justice picked who they picked. They feel like they can beat the Eternal. Maybe it's a revenge thing, I don't know. But the Justice, to me, should win this game pretty easily, and I think they will ultimately win it. I'm not going to, beat around the bush. I think that they will ultimately win this game, but it shouldn't be close, but I think it will be somewhat close because the Justice seem to just kind of not know how to really live up to their potential. But we saw them make a really good postseason run last season. Maybe they can do it again this season. Maybe they have that special juice to get it done. The Boston vs. Toronto series. This one could be a pretty good series. It has the makings to be a decent series. I think when these two teams played in the regular season, I think it went the way of the Boston Uprising. I think they won it, but I'm not 100% positive. But I believe, from what I remember, it went the way of the Boston Uprising. But the Toronto Defiant have looked a lot better recently. I think that may have been when the Toronto Defiant were dealing with some of the issues with COVID. I think that was when Aspire first joined the team. So that was when the Defiant looked much weaker. So I think this should be a win for the Defiant. They've looked a lot better recently. The Uprising have looked pretty bad recently, to be completely honest with you. I don't think the Uprising really inspire much confidence in me. I think that the Defiant should win that one pretty easily. And I think the Justice and Defiant will move on into the semifinals. San Francisco Shock then get to pick between either the Justice and the Defiant in my kind of theoretical list here. And I think if you're the Shock, you kind of have to think of, do we want to play the Defiant who don't have the same level of peak as the Justice but are more consistent? Or do we want to play against the Washington Justice who are completely inconsistent, don't play very well sometimes, but other times can beat some of the best teams in the league? And I think if you're the Shock, you pick the known quantity. You pick the Toronto Defiant. You know what the Defiant are. You know what their peak is. You've beaten them before. They didn't push you at all in the previous time you played. They are the safer choice. Now, if the Justice lose to the Eternal, and it's the Eternal or the Defiant, then I think you pick the Eternal. That's the only scenario to me where you don't pick the Justice. Because to me, the Justice are just too much of a threat. Whether or not they play well all the time or not, their potential is much higher. And they're the type of team that I would just choose not to play them. I think you know how to prepare for the Defiant. You know who the Defiant are. You know what they are. You know what their ceiling is. It's much lower. I think you pick that if you're the Shock. Shock would play the Defiant in my scenario. I think the Shock would win that one pretty easily. I think it was a 3-1 when they played recently. So not a terrible match. But I think the Shock are better. And I think that they have... The Shock, in theory, should be looking much better as we go into the postseason. Because they have finally the ability to just kind of say, here's what we're going to run in the postseason. Regular season's over. Every match matters at this point in time. Everything is on the line. And so I think the team will kind of be much more kind of closely knit. And they'll say, we know what we need to do. Maybe it's just running Twilight Violet in the back line because they need a lot of break play. And I think when you have those two, they are just so good together that it just works very well. And I think they'll figure out what they need to run. I think that Reinhardt is not the way to go, so I don't know if we'll see a lot of super. But we'll see what happens. Shock seem to like to try to force Reinhardt whenever they can. Sometimes it doesn't seem like it works, but who knows? I don't think it'll really matter against a team like the Defiant, so I think the Shock will move on and qualify for the playoffs. Then the final match will be the Houston Outlaws against the Washington Justice. What a potentially great series. You have a team that is kind of on a decline or has been struggling to reach some of their early season success in the Houston Outlaws. And you have an inconsistent Justice team that could be potentially on the rise as we get into the playoffs, because that seems to be kind of when they like to click. And these two teams played recently. It was a 3-0 win for the Houston Outlaws, but I kind of think you can only take so much away from that just because it was, once again, hero pools when the Justice looked their worst, and who knows. Justice have had so much time to prepare and kind of solidify themselves. There's no hero pools, so they knew what the meta was going to be. Kind of, they knew what heroes were going to be able to be played. They've had, I think, 3 or 4 weeks at this point, though they've struggled every other time. They've had a lot of time, so who knows. This, to me, I think is a good series, or should be a good series. But I just, as much as both of these teams have disappointed me this season, the Houston Outlaws have disappointed me less. They have been more consistent than the Justice have been. Not much more, but more consistent. They have won games they should win, and usually when the Outlaws win a game they should win, they win it in pretty big fashion. They've been losing to some teams recently. I think all 3 of their losses this past stage were not close. I think they were all 3-0 losses. You know, like they beat the Justice 3-0, but then I think they lost to the Gladiators 3-0, and then they lost to the Fuel 3-0 not that long ago. So the Outlaws are struggling as well, but I feel more confident in them based on what I've seen from them this season. The Justice have been a little bit too inconsistent. Much too inconsistent. And despite the fact that I think the Justice are more talented and have a higher peak potential, they are really struggling to hit that, and a lot of that comes down to just their way of play, their play style. They just are slow. They don't take fights when they should. It's a disaster to watch when it's bad, and when it's good, they're one of the most exciting teams to watch. And when it's bad, it is like watching a train wreck while also on fire, while also in a tornado. It's just destruction that you don't really want to watch because you know you shouldn't be, but you can't stop watching. But I think the Houston Outlaws should be able to pull that one off and be the final playoff team. So I think the Seoul Dynasty will move on. I think the San Francisco Shock will move on. I think the Houston Outlaws will move on. But I would love to hear from you who you think will make it into the playoffs. Who is going to make it through the play-in tournament this go-around? I don't know, but I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments down below. But that is all from me for today. If you enjoyed this video and want more like it in the future, consider liking and subscribing. But that is all from me for today. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.